promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob went to Joseph's, not to Judah.
So what happened, like, I think that Jacob received the covenant promise from God. Is this correct? Isn't that what happened originally? And then
he was told his children would be, first of all, he was promised that the world would be saved through his nation, through his seed, through him, right? And that his family would become great, that they would be a world powers, and huge in numbers, as large as the number of sands.
So we're going to get to the map later, showing the different nations that were ruled by Britain or Ephraim, and
Absolutely.
also that Manasseh would be one people,
Yep.
of many different kinds, right? A pluribus
Manasseh
unum.
became America.
Yeah.
Reuben today is in France.
And then
and it's interesting. Let's just stop and talk about it, because these are big subjects, and we're not going to finish it all in this one show.
Well,
we're going to go through it over the next few weeks. But
do you want to talk a little bit more about Ephraim and Manasseh this show, and Reuben maybe, or?
Well, let's just play it and see where it goes. But one thing for sure is I would just want to, since we're talking about Reuben as France, it's interesting to note that Reuben was Jacob's oldest son, and it's interesting to follow this because you can see how these countries and these nations take on the characteristics of their chieftain, of the tribal chieftain, the original paternal.
Well, do you know what happened to Reuben?
Reuben was the oldest son of Jacob.
Now, what did he do? In, I think, Genesis 35:22, he did something he shouldn't have done. Yeah. What did he do?
He slept with his father's concubine. Actually, one of his father's wives.
Well, it said concubine.
Which is a no-no. Which is
a big no-no.
So he had a problem with sexuality and sex.
And isn't that kind of like France is very sexy? And isn't it interesting that
France are the descendants of Reuben, and that characteristic of Reuben, the father, has now been transferred through the generations, Mrs. Steele, thousands of years later, because they were made the tribal chieftain.
And he didn't get the blessing, did he?
He lost the birthright blessing.
He lost the birthright blessing. He was the eldest, right?
He was the eldest. So he was to get it.
He's a little jealous.
He's jealous. And that's why, and who did it go to? It went to Ephraim Manasseh, which is Britain, America. So and you wonder today, it's a common understanding that the French are sort of have a problem with the Americans. They're a bit jealous of them.
They are, aren't they?
That jealousy was inherent within Reuben and has been passed down from generation to generation. And we're talking about what year were these men born? Jacob lived in approximately 1500 BC. So these are character traits that go down thousands of years. Now, you
know what? Can we talk about how Israel left and went to live by the Caspian Sea?
Yeah,
and then spread out everywhere. And they used. Yeah, let's talk about them. Let's show the map.
Where the 12 tribes were in Canaan. Okay.
Can you make that one bigger?
Tribes were in Canaan. Now, we'll have the link for this. We'll have on the description with this show.
It's at Picasso Web.
For those listening, if they're live, it's Picasso Web, no www, just //picassoweb.google.com/Shock Talk with Bloom and Steele.
And then they can just click on.
They go into the folder.
Yeah, into the
folder
there. And they can
see.
Which is
now, here's the 12 tribes in Canaan.
Yep.
And you can see that it shows where all the 10 tribes, Judah was down at the south. If you look, Ephraim and Manasseh were given the bulk of the land.
They were.
And, of course, Dan is there, and Asher, and all the other
ones had their little
Benjamin
parcel of land.
Exactly. Now, what happened was after King David's son Solomon died, we won't go into the reasons why. Actually, what's interesting is he raised the taxes.
He did,
just like what happened between Britain and her colony in the United States.
He did.
Raised the taxes, so
he created a lot of problems with the people.
Split up from the throne of David, and there was none to follow the throne of David except for the tribe of Judah. All the other tribes went to the north, and created their own country. And here it is, the divided kingdom, with Israel to the north with its capital at Samaria.
Yeah, and Judah
to the south with its capital at Jerusalem.
Yep.
And all the inhabitants of the southern kingdom were known as the Jews. The people of the north, they weren't Jews. They weren't the descendants of Judah. They were the descendants mostly of Joseph. They're a Hebrew country, Israel, but they weren't Jewish because they weren't children of Judah. Judah was their uncle. So Israel is made up of Joseph's two boys, Ephraim and Manasseh, and the other brothers, Reuben, Simeon, Asher,
Benjamin,
Naphtali, Zebulun, and the list is
Simeon.
on the... Exactly.
And
Now,
so they migrated.
Now, what's interesting is these were two separate countries. And what has happened is the blessing that was given to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob, that they would be this world power.
And it would come about at a certain period in history, which was in the 1700s.
It was withheld,
didn't it? Yeah,
for
it was
7
withheld,
times. Yep. It was withheld. The blessing was withheld because they didn't obey. They worshipped idols and gave themselves to idolatry and Sabbath breaking.
God said he would give the blessing, so he had to give it to them.
He had to give it to them. But the thing is this, that the first time, let's just go back, this split happened after, remember, King David reigned in 1000 BC. This split happened right after that, in about 950 BC. And from 950 BC to roughly 720 BC, Israel reigned as a separate nation with separate kings. They had their own monarchy, their own kings, separate from Judah. Judah had its kingdom, this kingdom and its kings, and Israel had its kingdom and its kings. And they started to battle with each other and fight with each other. And Judah did not have the right to use the name Israel. That's very important to note. Didn't have the right. Matter of fact, the first term the word Jew is mentioned in Scripture, the Jews are at war with Israel. 2 Kings 16:6. People should look it up. So here are the two nations. Now, eventually what happened, Mrs. Steele, and we'll get to it, we'll just do an overview here, is... in 721 BC, the Assyrians, Assyria was a nation which Yahweh raised up and gave power to. He raised it up, and he used it as his rod to discipline these people and take them off to captivity. Right? Now, why don't you talk about where they went?
Well, there was a migration of the lost 10 tribes of Israel, and they spread
well, let's just go to the
Europe,
map. Here's
Great
the map.
Britain,
They were taken up
and
here to Assyria, right? And then go ahead over the centuries. They were taken and migrated through northwestern Europe. So that the word Dan, you see this all over. They were the Sumerians. They became the Angles, the Saxons. Saxons is Isaac's sons. You see the word Danube, the tribe of Dan, and they move right through. Go ahead. You want to continue with this map?
Well, I had my own map here, so
okay.
Well, the major migration, it took about 1,200 years. Started in 721 BCE and covered the Middle East, all of Europe, and North Africa. So starting in 720 BCE, the tribes of Israel moved northeast through Assyria to Parthia, where they settled for some 900 years. So the tribes moved in Europe, and for the next 2 to 3 centuries, so between 400 and 500 CE, the migration moved north into Scandinavia, which was home of the Finns, who were part of the Magyar or Hun horde.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this continued. So they spread all over, and of course you had the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes in Britain.
Yep.
You had, well, the Norsemen, that would be, they've got so many different names here, but they did spread right throughout Europe and Britain, and of course that's where they are right now. That's Israel.
Yes.
That's the migration of the 10 tribes is Israel.
And became, and eventually